like a man possessed. Rassie also took it one step further this week.
And so much to talk about. It's not this Rugby Union Show. It's That Rugby Union Show. Welcome back.
Bonjour. It feels so good to be back. It's been a minute, it's been a couple of weeks, but here we are leading up to a test match that I think a lot of people have been waiting for almost 2 years now. I can't believe that it was in 2023 where these guys took each other on in that quarterfinal at the Rugby World Cup, France versus South Africa. I think on the very first episode of this show, I said that's the match I'm most looking forward to. I still am. A lot of anticipation, incredible build-up, and that will be the focus of tonight's chat between me and Sim. Sim, good to catch up again. It's a big one, this one. And the French have been going off spy allegations, an early release of a team and then retraction, all sorts of chitter and chatter about revenge. And I just wonder if it's almost too much. It's almost too many mind games. Or even if it's coming from the French national team, you might just find that there are a bunch of French rugby supporters who are trying to create a little bit more out of this whole situation than the actual team. But what a match we're looking forward to. It's a biggie, lots of anticipation. And we'll take a look at the teams. It's two really big packs. There's going to be a lot of muscle on that field. This coming Saturday, I expect to see a crunching encounter, really brutal stuff.
Yeah, of all the sort of shenanigans of the week, the one thing that I've really enjoyed was, the French are supposed to be unpredictable. You never know what's going on in their heads because they're so, they're just going to turn, they're erratic. And then Rassie goes and, predicts their team. And he puts it out there like it's word for word the same team. The only thing he got wrong, I think, was player number 22 and 23 swapped around. But the rest of it was exactly the same team.
We'll forgive him.
Yeah, for me, if guys are talking, they've got spying allegations, throughout the week. They've already they're really sort of frothing at the mark about 2 years ago, asking questions about Ntshinga. How can you get this guy, who's tested positive in your squad? They're doing their level best to kind of and I think with just that one move, Rassie just deflated their wind and just kind of guys, it probably got them angrier, actually, which basically means you're going to be playing against a very, very emotional French side. And it seems like they've got their own sort of little problems internally as well. Obviously, we know that guys like, DuPont are missing. But, the really sort of tricky stuff here is Gregory Aldritt, who was, his deputy in the Six Nations, who deputized for him in the Six Nations as the captain. He's not in the 23, and apparently it's not necessarily because he's injured or anything of the sort. Because obviously there's a whole host of guys that aren't fit enough to take their place from 2 years ago. But apparently he didn't want to go on that tour of New Zealand where a lot of the leading French players didn't go. And then, when he was going to La Rochelle, back to La Rochelle, his team, he was kind of talking in the media about, needing a little love. So I see now that Fabien Galtier's has made it possible for him to get all the love, from La Rochelle because he's not playing this weekend. You got to love the French there.
I don't know why I had images of Pepe Le Pew in my mind as you said that. But anyway, listen, if you're watching, if you want to drop a comment, ask a question, please do. We welcome them. Give us a share and a subscribe as well while you are watching this. But an unbelievable build up to the match. And it just seems like a lot of distraction, a lot of chat. There's not a lot to do with the actual rugby, and we will go into those selections. But the other thing that you mentioned in there, and that's worth touching on, is that because of the end of the French top 14, we didn't see a couple of first choice players go to New Zealand, and New Zealanders were up in arms about that, claiming that they've sent second and third stringers, which might actually work out for the benefit of France, given that they've had one or two players who are out injured. And I think it's particularly in the front row where we'll have to see these two young props come good. I mean, the two props, I think there's only, 4 test caps. And, a lot of that was due to that depth being tested by the Kiwis earlier in the year. That said, this French team hasn't actually really played together since the end of the Six Nations. Maybe they'll feel like maybe a little underdone, undercooked, not battle hardened enough coming into this one. But it does poise a fantastic competition and sort of arches back to the things that we were talking about in the global season. These are the Six Nations champions against the Rugby Championship champions. It really is a North versus South. Over the course of the season, the two best teams, North and South, up against each other. And I love that. I love that little tussle and little battle. But the fact that, you've got these two very young props, and they are exciting players. So was there benefit, I suppose, is my question, to them sending that squad, the squad that they did to New Zealand?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll start by the name of one of these young props you're talking about. The tight head's name is literally Montagnier, which is basically my. He's like 130 kilos. He's like 130 kgs. You're like, okay, cool. He's a big fella. Like a name. It's in the name. Like for once you've got an appropriate name for a tight head prop instead of something like Alberta's buckle, like we used to have a few years ago. You're like. You're like, China, you don't want to do that in a match, not in a scrum. So anyway,
James Slipper.
Yeah, exactly. To answer your question, I do think it is to their benefit. I think the rest of the free world, I think there are basically only two countries that have the whole sort of depth development idea 100% right, and it's ironically us and the French. The rest of the world kind of has an ass about face in that what they think, the way they think you develop your depth is you go and try to fit guys in when you've won a series. No, you've got to put those guys under pressure, because then what it does for you is it kind of like immediately shows you whether the guy has got the aptitude for that level or not. So actually, if you've seen it with the Boks, if they're playing new players, they're not going to play them in dead rubbers. They play them in games that matter. I'll give you an example. That's Wales test in Bloemfontein, I think in 2022 it was, which we lost. I think we lost it 14-13 or whatever it was. But it gave us Kitley Arendse, Grant Williams, and I forget who the third player was. So the way it works is if you are going to put players, if you are going to try and develop your depth, actually the best way to do it is to try and do it in games that matter. Because if you do it in games that matter, it gives you just an easier way of seeing who's who in the zoo in terms of the guys that are going to make it. Sure, you're probably going to lose. France lost that series 3-0 to New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, they ran them close, I think, in 2 of those tests. So when it is very beneficial. So when we look at those guys, we must sit and go, oh, these guys, we're just going to run them over simply because they're young. And then just talking about, obviously, the North versus South, the one thing you've already mentioned is the fact that the French haven't played at all. They're going to be playing their first game this weekend, whereas we've obviously played against Japan. That was our hit out. It's weird in a strange way when you look at these two teams. One team is kind of like, is either sort of battle hardened or on the point of weary because they've played so much already this year, and that's obviously us. And they are either fresh or underdone. So we're gonna know on Saturday who's kind of who's going into that clash. But it is nicely set up because there's so many contradictions, there's so many contrasts. But where there are no contrasts on the field, it's two teams with eye-wateringly massive packs, and they've both chosen to go 6-2 split just to emphasize the point that we're gonna make this physical. And like in terms of, the talent of the field as well. I mean, I know the French probably have a lot more guys that we don't recognize, but, they wouldn't play for France or Galtier if they were not actually talented. You look at a guy like, we talk about DuPont the whole time, but Noel Le Garrec is a very good player. I've watched him torment a couple of South African teams in the Champions Cup, and that guy is a guy you don't mess with, because he's one of the special players as well. He's not just a scrum half. The way he plays, he's got all these tricks, and I think he kicks for goals, and it's one of those guys. So we probably do need to be careful, not get ahead of ourselves. But I won't lie, I don't see how we could possibly get ahead of ourselves in this match.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there's any chance that either side is going to take this lightly. And, Fabian Gauthier also has an incredible amount of respect for Rassie Erasmus. He always goes out of his way, I think, to mention. And obviously, you can see how he's mirrored a lot of Rassie's tactics, and you talk about the fact that they've got 6-2 on the bench. And they also have a player on that bench, I think it's Ugo Oradu, who's also played at center at some stage. So it really is almost like a mirror image of each other. Thanks for the comments, you guys, all in the game. You mentioned this earlier, and I should have stuck this message on a little bit earlier, saying it would have been ideal if this was France's second or third match this autumn instead of coming in cold. It's going to be a tester for them, just to get a little bit of that game play under the legs, and maybe that's where the Boks, one of the areas that the Boks can edge them, is those combinations might not necessarily be settled. So you mentioned the scrum half, Gaire, who was also played against Kobus Reinach, and I remember watching one of those top 14 matches, and he did look quite decent, or the more decent of the two scrum halves. But maybe it's the pack that might help even out things there as well. Andre, thanks for the comment. 2 weeks, dudes. Yeah, he doesn't sound happy with us. It has been, and I have been rocking around the country.
And rightly so.
Sure. No, I've been busy. I've been throughout the Karoo. I think I did about 2,000 kilometers of driving just last week. I just came back from Mabalingwe a couple of hours ago. I don't know why it's all getting so hectic now towards the end of the year, but it's really good to be back. Boks by 33. Not the confidence. I don't know. We'll talk about it. We'll He's a very very confident.
No. Andre needs to explain that. He needs to explain that.
Okay, Andre, try and tell us why. Tell us why. How's that? And Elijah Mann. Yeah, we'll find out. Alele Bokke. Love that one. And come on, Andre, I don't know what other French you're writing on there. I can't read that. Rassie's World Fabian Coutier is just slipping in it. A little bit naughty, but I suppose, Rassie set the tone for so much of what the French are about at the moment. And I do find it exciting that there is another team in the world that can almost match the Boks when it comes to selection man for man. But like you said, it was definitely preempted to some degree by Rassie. I think let's go into those teams. There are a couple of the French players, admittedly, that I'm not terribly afraid with. And I mentioned the two props up front. Montagnier, very big guy, a tight head prop. But the exciting one is Erodossi, or the loose head prop. Very short guy, diminutive guy for a modern day prop, but I think very good for when it comes to scrummaging. Let's start with the Boks side as well. In fact, while we've got that up there, no real surprises. The only surprise for me, Sim, is the name that isn't there on the bench. No Bokke.
Yeah. So I also had exactly the same thing. I took one quick look and I thought, hang on, wait. Well, how do we not have Bokke on the bench? Bokke basically takes the BS out of bomb squad, if you know what I mean. He's since Faf sort of stopped being Rassie's agent of chaos, of organized chaos. Bokke's picked up that slack. But apparently he's got a hand injury. But then, just as you're like you just said, oh, he's got a hand injury. Rassie then turned around in the presser and said, but we were actually not gonna play him in this match. I'm like, wait, what? Have we forgotten the impact that Kwagga had? I think Kwagga had the penalty. Didn't Kwagga had the penalty in that 29-28 victory? Didn't he have the penalty on DuPont next to the try line, in front of the try line, that led to even its try, that the quick tap? And then he had the turnover penalty just inside his own half. Granted, if they'd looked hard at it, he should have been penalized the other way around. But he had that penalty where Andre Pollard kicked for South Africa penalty, with Bongi Mbonambi in his ear. So I mean, that's how useful he was against France. So if we saying that Kwagga was suddenly too small to sort of compete in physically against the French, I'm not quite sure what the thinking was. But by the same token, if you watched Andre Esterhuizen play last week, granted it was against Japan, he is starting to look, feel, talk, walk, and when I say look like a forward, Oaks taking onto the field with a black eye now, that basically means you're a forward now. When you start matches with a black eye, you must know you're a forward.
He also scores more tries as a forward than he does as a center. So maybe
exactly.
It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. I look at that team and I look at that Springbok bench, and there's nothing to suggest that the second half is going to be finished, at least from a Springbok perspective, by a team trying to win the ball on the ground, turnovers like this. I think there's going to be a lot of bash, carry up, and take. You were talking about that Wales game. I think the name that you were looking for just now, that I don't know why all of a sudden came to my head. No, man, it's Bulls Lock. I think you were talking about one of the Bulls Locks who came into that game for the first time. Somebody help me out there in the comments as well, because I think I'm not going to let it's not going to slip my mind until I've found the answer. So please, if you know who the other person is who got an opportunity to have a run out in that loss that the Springboks suffered. Sim, did you say it was 2022?
Yeah, it's 2022.
2022. Yeah, I've got a feeling it was one of the locks. But anyway, if anyone knows, it'll stop bothering me so much. Julian, our Julian, saying this team is a return to the old school team that struggled at the beginning of the rugby championship. Do you feel that way when you look at, is this a traditional Springbok selection?
Look, I mean, if I wouldn't go as far as say old school team that struggled. Well, I guess if you look at names and you basically go, okay, cool, these guys did struggle. But I don't know, if you've got Cheslin Colby and Kurtley Lawrence available, do you play Ethan Hooker? I'm not sure you do. Yes, you could quibble about Jesse Creel and Kenan Moody, simply because of Kenan kind of looked to have a little bit more mercury. He was more mercurial. He's more mercurial than Jesse Creel. But I think the thinking here is to play an experienced center pairing. And if the French are going to run at you all day, what you want is probably your best sort of defensive center, which is obviously Jesse Creel to be marshalling the defense, instead of, say, maybe someone like Kenan, who's still learning the ropes in that regard. I mean, Kenan does a lot of wonderful things because he makes a lot of nice reads and he makes massive spot tackles. But it's still, at the moment, it's still a bit hit and miss. Whereas I think that's all it is. It's just trying to make sure that we're not leaking, we're not leaking defensively, because if we're leaking defensively and it's 7 points at a time, who's to say we're going to keep responding like we did in 2023 in that quarterfinal? One of the things, I actually watched that game back on a Monday, and one of the things that struck me watching it was actually we were under the cosh in that game for about 60 minutes. So we kind of like, what we really did well was not only did we stay in the fight, but we also took our chances extremely well. I think we had something like 5 entries in a 22 and scored 4 times, and scored 4 tries. So you kind of, that's when you sit and you go, actually, so you can't expect exactly the same kind of game where you're like, oh, if they score, we get to score as well. So just looking at the rest of the team, I get what Julian's saying, funnily enough, in that, if you go Lured and Etzebeth at lock, that was kind of like the pairing, I think, that that didn't win it at Eden Park. But I don't know, the rest of the guy kind of like, most of everything is roughly the same. If you look at, if you look at Boan Fenta, you don't have a choice but to have him there. And by going with Boan Fenta, what you're doing is you're just making sure that you're not sort of having too many moving parts in terms of changes, because you could have gone with Thomas du Toit at loose head prop, but then that requires either Ntshinga or Zach Porton to be the other prop. Zach Porton just made his debut last week. You're not going to throw him into to the Wolves against France. I said Ntshinga, yes. He's played a little bit more, 2 more caps more, or 1 more cap, because he's had 2 caps, but he's also got this, this drugs thing hanging over his shoulder that becomes, the big focus of the game, and maybe you want to, you want to just, take that away from him. So I don't know. I'm not sure how much more they could have changed by way of the team they've selected. Yeah. And also at some weird level, I think maybe by having Sasha at 10, a lot of your decision, and maybe Damian Willems at 15, a lot of your a lot of what you can do is determined there in terms of going on attack. But in terms of the forwards, I'm trying to think, if you promote Erles Neyman up to the starting lineup, who do you have sitting on the bench? Is it just Ruan? Do you take Ruan because Ruan was actually the incumbent in terms of the last 3 tests, I think, in the Rugby Championship? It is
Ruan Orkia I was thinking about, incidentally. It was his first cap.
Oh, sorry.
It was his first cap that match. I'm glad that's gone now.
Okay, no, that's cool. Yeah, and I'm not sure how much more different we could have gone, especially with the talk that we could quibble about Kwacha, but we could quibble about Kwacha, but I think ultimately injury made the decision anyway. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happened. It just feels like we're more settled than they are. But there was Julian. I think just wants a little more chaos than the rest of us are willing to stomach at the moment.
I think it's just a stir at heart. I think it's just like stirring is what it is. There was talk that Thomas du Toit might necessarily play off the bench. I'm glad that they didn't. I think that this makes sense. Yeah, I think you want to finish with the stronger of the tight head props, and maybe the more industrious and the open loose in Thomas to get the game cracking. And yeah, you did remind me about how we could have fallen behind in that quarterfinal against the French in the World Cup in 23. And what was it? It took them 2 minutes to get across the whitewash. It was very, very quick. The way they scored, the way they came.
Yeah. I think it was like the 3rd or 4th minute, and suddenly they scored, and they just kept coming at us, and we just kept basically sucker punching them, and it was quite ironic. They scored, we scored, and then we scored again, which was like a bit of a surprise because it was completely against the run of play. And then they scored again, but then there was that Jesse Creel grubber for Cheslin that set up so beautifully. And then he just ran it home. There was the charge down. Okay, we're gonna go down that memory lane all over again. Maybe I should stop.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, the one key player who was there, who's not for this weekend, is Bailly. I think is one of their best players. He's unbelievable, and I think it's massive.
Oh, he scored 2 tries that night.
He scored 2 tries that night. Yeah,
I think it
massive
was his
loss.
birthday on the day as well.
Right. Let's go on the questions. What in the game isn't Andre playing the Bokke role of the bench? I suppose he is the player who'll swing between forward and back, and he'll cover whatever it is that Rassie, I think, might feel he needs in that second half. I think his selection means that it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion where he comes on to provide cover. But I mean, just his size, his strength, and his speed is going to, I think, tell as well. Pace of the back says Andre creates back. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's quite interesting. I had a chat with Jacques Nina Barayant of all people earlier today, which about Siya, and obviously we just had a quick chat about the squad. And he was kind of pointing out that, you know, in that whole, we've become so used to a 6-2 split that we assume that things are going to go okay. But it's still risky. It's still a risky sort of way of setting up your, you know, your bench. Obviously, it's no longer as risky as, say, a 7-1 split. But essentially what he was saying was it's better if you've got a back that can play amongst the forwards, rather than the other way around, where you're going to need, you know, a forward to kind of like, you know, suddenly have the skill of a back. Whereas, you know, you don't expect a back to struggle with the skills going forward, other than just, you know, have to be stronger. And so I think, I guess at that level, I get it that he's going to play the Bokke role, but I've just seen Bokke do so many insane things on a rugby field that I just want that forever, almost, you know, because there is no one like Bokke Smith.
Yeah.
Like I've never seen anything like it. You know, that just that level of work rates, that's just that level of almost physical audacity, if you want to call it that. That guy's insane.
Yeah, he is. And he's the second Albertus that you mentioned in tonight's show as well.
This one doesn't buckle.
This one doesn't buckle. I like that. So Andre's explaining himself here because he called it by a big score. What did he say? By 33.
I said 33.
He says here, if we're ahead by 10 halftime, we'll kick on. And it's possible. It's very possible. I don't know. It still seems a very big leap for me. Just because of the quality of the French. But
chat with Andre. I want to chat with Andre on Sunday morning. Like, just be like, so how did this go? And you know, a really cool thing. In all likelihood, we'll be sitting there like going, "Geez, how did you know?" Instead of like, "What were you smoking?" type vibes, you know?
Yeah. Oh, man, I hope you're right. I so hope you're right. Springboks only have 50% success rate. And before the easy 100, no. Okay, so he's referring to the 100th test match of Siya Kolisi.
Is tricky.
It is very tricky, and reminding us what happened with Barney's 100th, with John Smith's 100th at FNB Stadium. It was a day to forget. It should have been a momentous occasion. The first time the Springboks play the All Blacks at that incredible World Cup venue. And it really is a superb stadium. It really is. I'd love to see more rugby. I know that one of the test matches next year against the All Blacks is going to be there. So I'm looking forward to that. But it is tricky. And I always wonder, you know, especially for somebody who's in the captaincy, having to think about the game and try and not let this overshadow him. But sure, he's been around, hey. You get that 100th cap because you are an experienced campaigner. You do have 2 World Cup wins under your belt. And I think in terms of the teams, those are the 2 big differences, is the age profile. The Boks are older, but they also have a couple of World Cup winners in there. And hopefully that experience will count for a lot when things get dark and, you know, you're heading into that last quarter.
Yeah, look, I actually like and don't like the idea of Siya, you know, making this team for the French, you know, for the French versus thing. I was a bit concerned by all the talk about. I was a bit concerned about all the talk about. Oh no, we should save him from next year to play against the All Blacks. That's quite arrogant and cocky. to assume that Siya, who turns 35, who would be 35 by then, will still be around and still playing, is his arrogance and kind of like putting the cart before the horse. So I was glad that they decided no, he's going to get his 100th while he can. Obviously, the history of the guys getting the 100th. I think of the 8, 4 have won and the other 4 haven't won. As you alluded already, Smitty, instead of winning, Smitty was left holding, was it Nonu's glass slipper, because his shoe came off in that tackle, and that's all he was left with, the Oaks shoe instead of, anything else. Jeez, he's probably going to kill me for this if he hears me. But anyway, so there was that. I think John Elias got injured in his, and it was in New Zealand, and that's when Mano again had to go. Had left his jersey in his locker where he was sitting in the locker room and whatnot, and so it's Siya's got a 50%, it's got a 50% chance of either winning or not winning. But what I really like about the game is the magnitude of the game. It's such a big game that I don't think anyone can be getting all schmaltzy and sentimental about the game. It's such a monumental task to try and beat these guys at home with all the history and the background behind this game. And so I think it'll almost like suit Siya to a T. If you take him back to, his first test as captain, in 2018, there was so much pressure because, first black captain and all of that. And now we're playing against England, Eddie Jones, England, which I think had gone unbeaten for, had matched or broken the unbeaten record. He actually got it. He got it done. He got it done. So I think the pressure of the occasion will actually, get him going too, which then I think will ease up the nerves and the other guys kind of like trying to make it nice for him. So I do kind of I don't like the fact that he's gonna get France for his for his 100th. But you know what? I'd much rather talk next year about Siya being a 100-capped Springbok than, still hoping he does and he's sitting injured somewhere in Durban and you're not sure if his career is going to continue again.
Yeah, I mean, the inverse of that as well, while we're addressing it, Andre, is that I always thought that the Kiwis in particular were very good when somebody hit a big milestone, whether it's the 50th or 100. They tended to, talking a couple of years back, lift their performance for those games. And I think that's what happens when you've got a team that's playing confidently, that has that self-belief. I think these are the little triggers that they tend to hold on to and actually help them rather than hinder. So I'm hoping that this Bokke team coming in and I think fairly so, as favorites, they are the world champions. We hate that tag. But this is when you prove that status is in matches like this. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion who's going to win it, but I do think the Bokke have to own the fact that they're the world champions, and everybody, possibly no one more so than the French, wants to get at them. And talking about the French, let's get that team up, please, Paul, and just take a look, because I am really, really excited about just the shape of this team. And Sim, you mentioned the bench and let's call it a bomb squad. They've also got 2 locks on the bench, and even the number 8, Julia, has played at lock. He's a really, really big guy. That loose trio is absolutely immense. Those guys are huge, and it just tells me that they prepare to tackle, and they just up for the physical contest as well. They've picked the biggest men, I think, that are available and fit in France at the moment.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's either going to work or treat, because it doesn't matter how much the Bokke have developed their game. I still think that the key to beating the Bokke is matching them physically, at least, first things first. And then obviously they seem to have picked, I don't know, even bigger guys than we've got, which then means, they intend to not only match us, but to dominate us physically. But the thing with the Bokke and sort of like talking up physicality or how physical you're gonna be. That's just basically poking the bear, because you start talking like that with the Boks, and they love the biggest guy in the opposition. They love targeting that guy. Remember Jonah Lomu, a big part of why Jonah Lomu didn't score against the Springboks is because he was such a big guy and people expected him, to run through people. And the Boks just basically decided, okay, well, they were going to queue up to tackle him instead of the other way around. And so I think sometimes when you decide that you're going to come at the Boks from a physical perspective, it can be quite dangerous, because there's a lot of things you might want to challenge the Boks on. You might want to challenge their smarts, not this current crop of Boks. You might want to challenge their skills. Again, not necessarily this current crop of Boks, but the one thing you don't ask questions about is whether they're going to be physical or not. And so I don't know. I think as good as this looks, this might as good as this team looks on paper, it might actually backfire just from the perspective of the message it's sending out to the Boks, which is which for me would poke the bear a bit.
Hey guys, if you like what you see and you want to support the show, we want you to be part of That Rugby Union Show family. Then just hit the like button, subscribe to the show, tell your friends, make sure you join us every time we're on. Slap that bell harder than Rassie finds loopholes in World Rugby's rulebook. There are new episodes every week. Don't miss it.
You disappeared. What, did you mute yourself like all the guys?
Like all the old dudes. My hair's not that white, but anyway, no. I was still here, and I was trying to lead you into that back three conversation. In fact, the backs.
No, I couldn't hear you.
Oh man, but the backs. No, it's all good. Let's continue on. In particular, and Gilles Ficou, very experienced, now taking over the captaincy. But the two back threes. I mean, for me, what a battle! These six guys are amongst the best in the world in their respective position. The two French wings, incredible pace. Louis Biel Barry is one of the most exciting players, I think, on a rugby field anywhere at the moment. Thomas Ramos, Thomas Ramos, the fullback, they'll be relying on his goal kicking as well, especially if it's a tight game. So incredibly important for their endeavor on the field come Saturday night. But very excited about the kind of firepower they have out wide. And I have been sort of fixated on the physical aspects of the match. But if it is one of those loose games, which I don't see it being, it could be incredibly exciting though.
No, it's going to be going to be an incredible game. As physical as these two teams, want to be to start with, which is pretty much how any rugby game should be played. They do like to play as well. So I don't necessarily think. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of kicking, because that is the easiest way to putting pressure on the opposition in today's game. But I do expect that there'll be some electric moments. Romain Nthinga, I think. One of the things that happens is because DuPont became so big and everything seemed to sort of revolve around him. I think we started underestimating what a good player he is. That guy is a good little player. He was, like 3-4 years ago, he was probably, their Sasha, if you want to call it that.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see that matchup to start with, and then obviously the boys in the back three. I don't think they need any introduction. I mean, was it Beto who scored like 6 tries against the Sharks in one Champions Cup game? So, but like they also know what our guy can do, because going back to that quarterfinal in 2023, both our wings did score. Obviously off the kicking game again. Cheslin off the Jesse Grubber, and I can't remember it was Marnie, I think, who made that kick, which everybody missed, and then Kurtley Arons just was there to pick it up first and run through to score. So it's not like they don't know. You talk about Ramos and the kicking. I wonder if he still remembers the charge down. The charge down. But it's the French is always quite interesting. You remember, I think in the Six Nations, Ramos was playing Ramos was playing fly-off, and which was an interesting situation, which ended up with Matteo Jalibert basically refusing to honor a call-up because he was the fly-off in that squad, in that Six Nations squad that Ramos ended up playing playing at fly-off for. And of course, Jalibert was the guy who got run over by Etzebeth when he scored, but from what I understand now, he's injured and not available. So that's fair enough. But yeah, you're 100% right to point out the fact that, they're not just going to be physical with the Boks. They are going to try and play it. But like I said, you've got to first either match the Boks or dominate them up front. Dominate is a massive task. And I think the Boks themselves are kind of picked to make sure that they don't get dominated. I think, that whole Guaja days and two locks on the bench thing kind of like drops broad hints as to their intent. But yeah, it will be very interesting to see. Like for me, the biggest issue for France is, will they be sort of, will they be ready? Or maybe needing, one more game to shake off the rest and get a bit of cohesion going. That's pretty much the only question I would have against France, which is, are they ready? Yes, they want to sort of play a game high on physicality, intensity, and probably tempo, but are they physically ready to do that in a match situation? That's pretty much the only question I would ask.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm quite surprised at how much that quarterfinal loss for the French has lingered, over the last 2 years. I really, not to say that, I mean, I was there in 2011 in New Zealand when we got knocked out at the quarterfinals, and it was painful. There was a forward pass that was still contested by some. There was, and we did harp on it for quite some time. And Bryce Lawrence, was a name that rang out of South Africans' lips for quite some time. In fact, now that we got that picture on, Andre says that looks like a soccer shirt. I guess it does a little bit, but I quite like the look of that. Like, it's not bad. I think it's quite nice. So these guys have had this partnership with Adidas for quite some time. So, it makes sense that they're trying. Yeah, they get creative.
I genuinely would buy that. I genuinely would buy that.
It's very cool. It's very cool. We might have to do some convincing for Aldritt. He's not gonna.
But then I'd have to have the money for it. It's probably like 1,500, $2,000 to buy it. And yes, I got kids to take to school there.
Bro, that's gonna be more than a box shirt. And you got to decide: am I buying a car or a box shirt? It's just
Listen, just to talk about how the French have sort of like wallowed for the last 2 years. I think it's how it happened. By the how, I mean 1 point. And like I say, we dominated that. Well, we were dominated they had the upper hand for about 60 minutes off that game. And so, they probably throughout they felt like they were going to win it, but to suddenly, be looking around and you've lost, because that's how it felt as well. It was a bit sudden, the defeat. So there's that first. And then the second part of the how is the refereeing. They had issues with the refereeing because they felt that Ben O'Keefe made some obvious mistakes that, there was a whole lot of things. Like they kept accusing, I think, was it Jesse of leading with the elbow against going into a tackle against Pino. There was also, I think, I also think one of the other Bokke players led with the elbow allegedly into DuPont, obviously DuPont having just recovered from having a fractured eye socket. And so there was all those things, if you really want to be forensic, you could go back to Kwacha's penalty to the goal that actually won it. If you look hard enough at that, Kwacha probably gets penalized because he puts his hand on the ground first, and then he gets onto the ball, but he gets the rub of the green. And then there's, the other contentious, sort of decisions. Even Etzebeth smacking the ball back and it being deemed to have gone backwards instead of forwards. That could have been an early yellow card for Eben, who did get a yellow card in the end for the high hits on Antonio. And then there's, there's still like conjecture about whether Cheslin was too early on the charge down. So it's all of that stuff put together. Plus then, the other part is just the significance of the defeat. You hosting the tournament and you get knocked out in the quarterfinal. You probably thought you had the best possible team you've ever put together, which they did, and you still lost. So I think that's why it lingers. Still, it's how massive a chance that's been missed. Remember George Gregan's sledge to the All Blacks? 4 more years, boys, 4 more years. I think it's exactly that kind of thing. It's them sitting around and thinking, geez, 4 more years of having to try again. You haven't gotten this done. I think it's just one of those situations. I think that's why they kind of like crying into their wine as it is, or whining into their wine as it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, the French, I think along with the Irish, are the 2 teams in the world who probably feel that by now they should have had a real crack at the World Cup, and had an opportunity in a final to take that trophy home. But yeah, still to happen. This is kind of moving us away from the actual match, but I think a very pertinent question, all in the game. Asks, are you both generally in favor of the expansion of Rugby World Cup from 20 to 24 teams, which was originally 16 teams for the first 3 tournaments? Is it good for the game, or will it dilute the quality? Initial thoughts is, unfortunately, we're going to see lopsided scores a lot more, depending on the draw, because the weakest teams do end up having to play against the best teams in a group. In fact, there's your second message says there are already so many blowouts in pool matches with 20 teams. So that's my one concern. But on the positive, I think it's really good for players from around the world to get the opportunity to test themselves against the best, to be there, to see what it's like, to understand how big a lift they might necessarily need going back home. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I just wish there was a way to mitigate from those one-sided scores in terms of how the draw is handled. I don't think it would ever change. So that's not nice to see. It's not nice to see a team at a World Cup take 60, 70 points or 80 points or whatever it is. Back in the day, it was a lot worse. The Japanese were taking 15 against the All Blacks in 95, or was it 125? I can't remember.
It was 135.
135.
Yeah,
even worse. Yeah, you don't want to see that, but, you fast forward the clock, and the Japanese have been a team that have faced a lot of lopsided scores over the years. They have been a tier 2 nation for a long time. But when you get it right, when you are measuring yourself against the best, you adapt. And for them, it was understanding that they need to get in, at least for a couple of years, 1 or 2 forwards, particularly locks from elsewhere. They have to change things up at home. So it can have a long-term positive effect, but not everyone is going to be as clinical as the Japanese will be in terms of their long-term planning. But you could get a team like Argentina that's able to find the personnel to do the things that they need to do. So yeah, it's a tough question and probably haven't answered you completely. I just don't want to see those lopsided scores.
Yeah, look, I 100% agree. Nobody wants to see that, but by the same token, you've got a choice. If you're going to talk about growing the game, then you've got a choice. How, in terms of how do you grow the game? Are you going to take charge of growing it, or are you going to hope that it grows on its own? And growing it can mean, I don't necessarily mean it has to mean, it can mean going to, having a bigger, more teams in the World Cup, because then it means more people from different places are qualifying, and which then means the footprint is getting, is getting bigger around the world. And I just think this is one of the sort of the low hanging sort of fruit in terms of trying to grow the game. You kind of like trying to do it yourself, and then what you do is you have a combination of hoping that teams go the Argentina/Japan route by sort of upskilling themselves and getting themselves up to the standard, or you as the rugby, as a rugby sort of governing body, go out of your way to then sort of equip them to be able to, play against these teams in future tournaments, by making sure that between World Cups they play against these teams. Because I think that's the other issue with rugby. What we do is, you can play against all these tier 2 teams in the world, and then you don't see them for 4 years. What I really like is the idea that, you get to play against Georgia, you get to play against Portugal, you get to play against, all those other sort of tier 2 teams in between World Cups, which, yes, those will be blowouts because, in those bilaterals. By the same token, guys are growing all the time, and hopefully everyone's kind of like picking up what the weaknesses are and trying to address them. Fiji years ago, everyone knew what the potential was until World Rugby kind of like decided to roll up its sleeves and sort of send people there to try and help them and give them the help they needed. So it can be done. And then, this would obviously mean doing it at a much bigger scale.
I'll tell you what I like was the way that Argentina rugby and SA rugby, and maybe it might have been accidental that it was so successful, but the way they went about infusing the Pampas 15 into South African local domestic competitions. And they were too strong for Vodacom Cup, let's face it. I mean, let's be honest. There were a couple of really good players there who probably should have been playing at a much higher level, but I don't know, it gave them a chance to measure themselves, to kind of understand where they stood. I like the idea of players having little stints in different countries as a plane flies overhead. I think it's really good for them to experience. And I'm a little sad that we don't see a lot more sort of Romanian players maybe trying their hand at Currie Cup, let's say, or, one or two Georgians. Although the Georgians, I think, by and large, are playing in France at the moment, we don't see a lot of Chilean players do the rounds. Russian players, I mean, there's another team that's been represented at a World Cup as well. You kind of want to see them infused into maybe different leagues and maybe at different levels across different domestic competitions. It'd be great to see some of these guys play Super Rugby Pacific. Maybe it's one or two of their best players, but it would be absolutely invaluable. And I really liked the whole Pampas 15 thing. It was very difficult for them though, because those guys had to basically make South Africa home for, what was it, like 4 months at a time. It's a big ask for somebody who might have a family and not necessarily want to be away from home for that long. But I think that it's one of those critical Argentina rugby took to gain a level of confidence and then have it spread out, because it wasn't just the top players anymore who were getting competition against some of the other top players elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, look, are we really going to sit here and solve World Rugby's issues in one fell swoop? It's not going to happen.
That depends on what I'm drinking, son. Depends on what I'm drinking.
World Rugby itself. Sometimes I feel like World Rugby itself doesn't want to sort its problems out. So you're already up against it in that sense. By the way, looking at this weekend's game, it's also Rassie's 50th as coach.
Oh,
which is quite interesting. So he's coached 50 times. Well, sorry, 49, right. And he's won 36. I think his win percentage is like 73.5%. And he's the second longest serving Bokke coach after Jake White.
And you say this 2 days after his birthday.
Yeah. I was like, she said, no, it's 1 day after his birthday.
Oh, 1 day after his birthday. Was it yesterday?
Yeah. I actually said it. I actually said it yesterday. I said, geez, no wonder the Oaks got so much drama. He was born on Guy Fawkes Day, This is November the 5th. It's just like, that makes a lot of sense. This is why
remember.
Actually, all in the game's question on Lukhanyo, I'm leaving to.
Yeah, please, let's go there.
What are your thoughts? What are you? I mean, he's 31. He's leaving the Sharks to go to Japan. What do you think? How do you receive that sort of piece of news?
I think it's terrible for the Sharks because here you actually have a Springbok quality player who is around a little bit more often than the other guys. He doesn't get whipped in and out as often as, say, an Eben or a Siya, or until recently a Bongi. And, you know, I think it's been a big thing for them in terms of lack of continuity because you can't have 13 guys just whipped out of your match day squad to go and represent the Springboks and think that things are going to work out all the same. But for him personally, look, he's played for the Kubota Spears. So he knows Japan. He knows what he's in for. I think he's going to prolong his career. And I think he'll stay fit and available for Rassie as and when he's needed. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for Lukhanyo personally. I do think it's probably going to hurt the Sharks a little bit more than they might have even factored in, purely because he is now, and it might not necessarily stay that way. Who knows what the future holds and injuries and the rest of it. But he is now sort of a periphery player in that Springbok squad. He's a swing player. He's a cover option. And, I still think that Lukhanyo could still get back to his best. 31. Asked me 10 years ago and I would have said that's, the end of the career is definitely getting closer. But you ask me now, I'd have to say he's probably got a good 4 years, in him if he looks after himself. And Japan is one surefire way of doing that. 13 games, I think it is, from start to winning the grand final, which is a nice season. You're well paid, you get to test yourself against the best. And before I forget the final thoughts, because I also want to hear your thoughts on Lukhanyo, congratulations to Jesse Creel and his captaincy, which was announced as well with the Dynamos, I think. First time that a foreign player has ever captained the Japanese, club side, which I think is wonderful. It speaks volumes of the man. But yeah, that's what I think about Lukhanyo. Your take?
No. Look, I mean, that's my thing is simple. The money's is life changing from what I understand. When I say the money, I'm not talking him specifically. I'm talking about the players that go to Japan. The workload is less. So to get that combo together at 31, and I think he's had a look around and he's looking at a Kanan Moody coming in now. They still haven't tried Ethan Hooker in what could well be his position in the end, in what is probably his position.
Right.
So, the queue in front of him is getting longer and longer.
Yeah, there's still Judy's who still don't have an opportunity and still,
and so guys. Where I might slightly disagree with you is I'm not sure he can get back up to the magician that we saw in circa 2019 and just after that and a couple of years after that. I'm not sure he'll get back to that. I just think the injuries have taken it out of him. So if that is the case, and I'm hoping I'm wrong, if that is the case, then he might want to just look after his future. He's a double World Cup winner. He's won a rugby championship, at least a rugby championship. British and Irish Lions. He's done a fair bit for a guy who came from where he did. I just think for the rest of us, the disappointment is, we could have used so much more of that magic. I mean, I don't even know how many tests Lukhanyo's played, but in that time, there are so many magical memories. It would have been nice to have seen it for longer. The simple truth is there haven't been enough of those. And, it's nice that he's the one being practical about it as opposed to somebody else being practical on his behalf. Do you know what I mean? He's in charge of the narrative as opposed to the other way around.
I was going to say the inverse is that you could play on and play on and play on until you're eventually pushed out. So I kind of feel like, these are his terms, which is not bad. He played 42 tests, which is agonizingly close to 50 for a center. It's very easy to imagine him getting up there to that 50 mark. But I do feel like we're going to miss watching him around these parts because, like what you say, we're not going to see him in a Sharks jersey, and we certainly not if the future looks the way it does, going to see him in a Springbok jersey anytime soon, unless a whole confluence of events sort of conspire to have him back in that squad. But even then, I still feel that he would be in that Springbok squad again as cover and maybe off the bench. And, it's
Sorry,
tough. It's tough to get
I just saw Andre's comment
tough to get a dog
about
there.
Rock Nation.
Wait, but I missed it. What did he say?
It says Rock Nation and the gambling mafia family that own it made his move a no-brainer. Rock Nation is
Rock
toxic.
Nation is toxic. Wow. Okay.
By the way,
fine.
I just read it. I didn't actually say it. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough money if the lawsuit comes in.
Are you literally hey, Mark.
Literally, I'm doing the show by candlelight, as you can see. So,
but they're gonna take your candle, bro. Be careful. But anyway, we have to call it. Been on for over an hour, and it feels like there's still so much to talk about that just one game, and we haven't even touched on all of the other matches. There wasn't even a comment earlier. Was it from All in the Game about the selection in the Scotland match? Duan van der Merwe being dropped, big calls. And yeah, I wonder if it's not also a signal of the changing of the guard. Not to say he's not going to be there for Scotland or be there at the next World Cup, but maybe they're trying to expand depth. But there's a lot that we unfortunately are not going to have the time to get into, and maybe we'll pick up some of these things on Sunday, guys. So catch us Sunday, 11 o'clock. I think we'll stick to our time and break down what went down at the start of France. Allez le Bokke, I suppose I should end off by saying, but I cannot wait for this match. Mouth-watering clash. I just have to stay up late, so treat Saturday as a marathon and not a sprint.
Listen, speaking of marathons, it's gonna be a rough one for me because I only get to write after the game is finished, which basically means I'm gonna start writing after midnight. So that should be fun. But obviously the good thing is that I won't be drinking that night. So
yeah. Stock up on the coffee.
For 11 a.m. I should be okay for 11 a.m. I won't be hungover.
Listen, guys, do give us a like, a share, a subscribe, and don't forget that if you're not able to catch us on YouTube on this platform, you can always look out for us on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. We're on Spotify as well. So do give a like, share, and subscribe. And hey, we've been going for a little bit, so we are a YouTube partner. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what it means. I just know that soon we'll be able to offer memberships and so on. So come on, tell your friends about us. Make sure that they give us a like and share this as far and wide. We love these conversations. Love chatting to you as well. We want to make sure. So not just the coffee you need to stock up on. You also need to stock up on the candles.
Yeah, no.
We'll chat Sunday.
Cheers, guys. Good to see you.
Bye. Cheers, everyone.
Welcome back to That Rugby Union Show. What a week it's been.
He's playing like a man possessed.
And so much to talk about. It's not this Rugby Union Show. It's That Rugby Union Show.